Gene Simmons encountered Shannon Tweed in 1983 at the Playboy Mansion. It was 28 years before he would wed her, but their 2011 marriage had nothing to do with love. It was a cover-up for a scandal that had almost ruined his family. Newly uncovered footage from their reality show shows them discussing things that were never intended to reach the public eye. His son was embroiled in a plagiarism scandal. Legal reports in 2025 document cases involving female workers. The man who boasted that he had slept with 4,800 women is now to face penalties that extend far beyond his rakish reputation. Gene Simmons was not always Gene Simmons. He was born as Kamwitz on August 25, 1949 in Haifa, Israel. His mother, Flora Klein, had recently emerged from hell. She was born in Hungary in 1925 and had barely survived the Nazi concentration camps. His father's parents, Yohil Witz, also survived Hungary and married Flora in 1946. They immigrated to Israel in 1947, just before the state was created. With British soldiers still in the way, their history was one of suffering, and that suffering quietly reverberated through everything would be. By the age of 6 in 1955, things deteriorated. His parents' marriage disintegrated primarily due to the fact that they lacked money. His father remained behind in Israel. His mother brought him up intact caramel alone. She worked almost daily in factories stitching buttons just to make ends meet. Occasionally, they only ate bread and milk for supper. At 7 years old, Kay was already assisting. He harvested wild berries with a friend and sold them roadside. He understood what hardship was. He fashioned his first winter coat from an army blanket. The cold was indifferent, but he had no other option. His mother worked late nights, and he often cried himself to bed in an empty home. School wasn't any better. Other children bullied him because he was different. Even in post-war Israel, some of the hate his mother escaped trailed into the classroom behind him. But something else found him as well. Comic books, American comic books, Spider-Man, Superman, they were his escape. He could not even read English yet, but he attempted to anyway. By the time he was 7 years old, he was already fluent in Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish. And now he was learning English in secret as well. All for the sake of comprehending the heroes of those comics. In a post-war world that was still patching itself up, where there wasn't always enough food to go around, and hope seemed like an expensive luxury, those comics provided something to cling to. His mother didn't discuss much about what she'd experienced, but the ache was ever present. By 1957, Chaim had come to see it more clearly. She had been only 14 when the Nazis rounded her up for labor, digging potatoes out of fields while soldiers stood by with guns. She was dressed in clothes with crosses sewn on them, transferring from camp to camp, seeing her world dissolve one relative at a time. She didn't have to tell her. Her silence, her overprotectiveness, and the way she sometimes wept for no reason. Chaim knew it left something inside of him as well. A desire to never be weak, to never allow anyone to see him crack. That same year, in 1957, Flora made the decision that would alter everything. With little more than the clothes on her back, she, an 8-year-old Chaim, immigrated from Israel. They arrived in Queens, New York with no money, no English, and no relatives greeting them. His father remained behind, remarried, and began a new life. Chaim never saw him again. He became Eugene Clean and began anew. Flush toilets and TV dinners were unbelievable. But adjustment wasn't simple. Flora worked 15 hours a day in Brooklyn factories. Gene had to fend for himself with babysitters and learned the dictates of a strange new world. He attended a Jewish school for a time, but he didn't fit. Then he changed to public school. He graduated from Newtown High in 1967. Initially, children mocked him because of the way he spoke. His accent made him feel like an outsider wherever he went. But he did not let that crack him. He sold cactuses door to door. He picked fruit again, just like in Israel. Each insult, each rejection, it made him work that much harder. He began to learn English quicker by watching television and reading more comics. That's when his pop culture craze went wild. By 1959, when he was only 9 years old, he legally changed his name once more, this time to Gene Clean. He chose Gene after cowboy stars such as Gene Autry. He was in on being American now. even though he continued to reside in a small apartment with his cousins and mother. He became enamored with television, particularly The Ed Sullivan Show. When the Beatles guested on February 9th, 1964, something within him ignited. He yearned for that life. He wanted the stage, the adoration. He wished to be like someone, but deep inside he was still the boy with nothing. He even acted British at times, mimicking the accents of the Beatles in order to belong. Girls appreciated it. He was gangly, uncertain, enduring the mucked-up transitions of adolescence. But his charm was gradually developing. Throughout the 1960s, Gene did whatever work was available. He cut meat in butcher shops. He worked in deli on the counter. He made only $1,025 an hour, but he saved everything he made. Poverty had trained him to account for each cent. He avoided booze, even at parties. He observed how the older guys got drunk and sloppy. He remained alert. That was how he picked up girls. He said so himself. He applied his clearness when the rest of them lost their clarity. He began playing guitar, practicing every day. When he watched the Beatles on television, he was unstoppable. He made small bands and began constructing his future despite being at school. He attended Sullivan County Community College in 1968. He majored in education, attained an associate degree by 1970, and even taught 6th grade in Spanish Harlem for $75 a week. But his passion was not in school. He teamed up with Paul Stanley and set up a band named Rainbow, which later became Wicked Lester in 1970. Played in clubs at night, did other jobs by day. Gone even worked for Fashion magazine. He also did translation work using the Hungarian, Turkish, and Spanish that he learned as a child from babysitters and neighbors. But music was where his heart was. He experimented with new sounds, even recorded a few solo tunes using his own name. Meanwhile, he was sending cash back to his mother, still burdened with her survival and all that she'd lost in 1945. And then there was that portion of his tale that surprised even his followers. Gene Simmons states, he lost his virginity at near age 14 in 1963. He was merely a young boy on a paper route. On one cold winter night, before Christmas, he came to a customer's door. She answered in tears in only a fragile nightgown. She was a married woman. What ensued? He later explained in great detail in his book. It was not only the start of his sex life. Gene Simmons collaborated with Paul Stanley in 1970 along with Steve Cornell, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Zarella. They established a band named Wicked Lester. The sound was an unconventional blend of rock and folk, which emerged from the volatile music scene in New York City. They had, by October 15th, 1972, recorded a whole album at Electric Lady Studios, constructed by Jimi Hendrix. Epic Records had paid dearly to have it done, but their A&R director, Don Ellis, utterly despised it. He said the sound was too sloppy and too bizarre for radio and put in limbo forever. That rejection crushed Gone. He'd invested so much in the project, and now it was killed before it had a chance to start. Enraged, Gone and Paul fired Steve Corll, hired Ron Lejack for a brief period, and then closed down Wicked Lester altogether. But that wasn't all. Later, when Kiss became renowned, Gone and Paul offered $138,000 in 1977 to purchase the old Wicked Lester tapes just to ensure they never saw the light of day. They were afraid the old sound would destroy the hard-edged reputation they were currently establishing. Nevertheless, bootlegs surfaced on the internet later, showing such songs as She and Love Her All I Can, which were later re-recorded by Kiss without giving credit to the original members. That doomed band spawned something greater. By January of 1973, Gone and Paul had no use for compromise. They discovered a Rolling Stone advertisement by Peter Criss, a veteran drummer from bands such as Lips and Chelsea. He came in promptly. They then discovered Ace Frehley through on Ad in the Village Voice. As a group of four, they formed something that was new altogether. This was not going to be just any rock band. It was going to be a crazy, in-your-face spectacle involving makeup, fire, and fantasy. Drawn to the shock rock of Alice Cooper and the glam of New York Dolls, they debuted Kiss. Their first performance was on January 30th, 1973, in a small club in Queens named the Coventry, previously known as the Popcorn Club. There were only 3 attendees, some of whom were girlfriends of the band. However, that evening, Gene breathed fire on stage for the first time. It was a show that no one would ever forget. With no hit songs and no play on MTV, they gained fans. People heard about them through fanzines and from live performances, not the radio. In 18 months, they topped Anaheim Stadium in 1974. Gene went on to say their makeup was so weird and unusual that it just lodged itself in people's minds. It was raw, it was bizarre, and it was catching. In 1973, Gene made The Demon. Black Sabbath horror movies and comic book superheroes, such as Black Bolt, were the inspirations. He drew bat wings on his face beside his eyes and began spitting blood and breathing fire on stage. He had picked up the tricks from a professional. The band members did not have a definite plan when they first began working with makeup. Gene chose horror. Peter drew cat whiskers on his face. Ace constructed himself as a space alien. They worked in front of mirrors splattering, paint attempting to create something nobody had ever seen before. Their early performances barely attracted a dozen. At the Coventry, crowds hovered between 10 and 15, occasionally fewer, but those handful of people were talking when they left. Even prior to the internet, children were telling others. Gene told it was sticky and weird, but it worked. That makeup and blood and fire made frustration interesting. They didn't require a hit single on the radio. They just had to be remembered. In August of 1973, someone named Bill Aucoin saw Kiss perform at the Hotel Diplomat. He believed in them so much that he vowed to secure them a record contract in 2 weeks. And he did. They signed with Casablanca Records, a brand new label owned by Neil Bogart, by the 1st of November. Peter Criss was that thrilled when he heard the news that he literally dropped off his platform heels. The band soon made their first album with assistance from producer Eddie Kramer. It was put on sale on the 18th of February, 1974. Sales were minimal at first, a mere 75,000 copies, but the band did not give up. They toured in excess of 300 that year. Casablanca Records was on the verge of bankruptcy, but Kiss's relentless touring kept them going. Neil Bogart questioned their makeup gimmick initially, but when he watched the crowds build, he knew they were successful. In 1975, they were filling arenas, all without a major radio single to their name. Gone referred to it as a risk that made legends out of them. In those early years, Gone acquired an unusual habit. He started taking Polaroid pictures of his sexual affairs. Every woman was required to show the hotel key as evidence. Years later, he purportedly had taken close to 5,000 such photos, bragging in interviews that he had slept with over 4,600 women. He even displayed the pictures to friends and visitors. Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane denounced it as disgusting. Gene kept them all in a box. His wife, Shannon Tweed, discovered them after marrying him in 2011 and torched them live on their reality show, closing the book on that part of his life. Gene never took drugs, but his sex addiction became a part of his wild stage alter ego. From tiny clubs to huge stadiums, he converted mayhem into a show and into authority. All that changed on September 10th, 1975. That was when they launched the live album Alive. It was boisterous, raw, and brimming with the anarchy of their performances. You could hear the flames, the shrieks, and the blood in every song. They recorded songs in cities such as Detroit, Cleveland, Wildwood, and Davenport during that year. On May 16th, June 21st, July 20th, and July 23rd, the album quadruple platinum, selling more than 4 million copies. It was number 9 on the Billboard charts and remained there for 110 weeks. That record kept Casablanca from folding. Even a lawsuit against Neil Bogart was pending at the time, and Kiss's success reeled the company back from the break. The album title, Alive, was a nod to Slate's 1972 live album, which had inspired